What happened to Jim Morrison?
James Douglas Morrison was born on December 8, 1943 in Melbourne, Florida. His father was a rear admiral in the U.S. Navy, and the family thus moved around a great deal. Admiral Morrison commanded U.S. naval forces during the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964, which provided the pretext for the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in 1965. A strict authoritarian, Morrison's father was probably a major source of the outlandish rebellion that his son later acted out on stage and in real life. When Morrison began his climb to stardom, he would falsely claim that both of his parents were dead. In 1957, Morrison attended Alameda High School in Alameda, California for his freshman and first semester of his sophomore year. After attending St. Petersburg Junior College and Florida State University for a year apiece, Morrison moved to the West Coast to study film and theater at UCLA in 1964. He became infatuated with the poetry of William Blake and the writings of philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, and he gradually drifted away from school to work on his poetry and experiment with drugs, particularly LSD. In 1965, Morrison so greatly impressed film school classmate Ray Manzarek, who was a classically trained keyboardist and member of a local blues band, with his early attempt at lyric writing that the two decided to form a band. Robbie Krieger and John Densmore were soon recruited from the Psychedelic Rangers, and the Doors were born. The name was Morrison's idea, taken from The Doors of Perception, which was a book by Aldous Huxley on mescaline, and its introductory William Blake quote. All three musicians shared a common interest in the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's meditation practices at the time, attending scheduled classes, but Morrison was not involved in these series of classes. In 1966, Morrison reportedly attended a concert by the Velvet Underground at the Trip in Los Angeles, and Andy Warhol claimed in his book Popism that his black leather look had been heavily influenced by the dancer Gerard Malanga, who performed at the concert. Krieger and Manzarek claimed that Morrison was inspired to wear leather pants by Marlon Brando from his role in The Fugitive Kind. And No One Here Gets Out Alive, it is repeatedly mentioned that Morrison was especially drawn to the look and posture of the ancient Greek king Alexander the Great. In June 1966, Morrison and the Doors were the opening act at the Whiskey A Go-Go in the last week of the residency of Van Morrison's band, Them. Morrison was a tentative frontman at first, avoiding eye contact with the audience and sometimes even singing with his back to them, but he soon came out of his shell, flinging his mic stand around and using it in all sorts of different ways. In November 1966, Morrison and the Doors produced a promotional film for Break On Through to the Other Side, which was their first single release. Morrison and the Doors continue to make short music films, including The Unknown Soldier, Strange Days, and People Are Strange. The Doors achieved national recognition in 1967 after signing with Elektra Records. The single Light My Fire spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in the summer of 1967, a far cry from the Doors opening for Simon and Garfunkel or playing at a high school as they did in Connecticut that same year. Later on, the Doors appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, a popular Sunday night variety series that had given the Beatles and Elvis Presley national exposure. The only difference is that when Ed Sullivan told the band to take out a couple of lines from Light My Fire, Jim Morrison completely ignored what he said and sang the song as you heard it on the radio and on the album. Let's just say they never appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show again after that. As the Doors rose to stardom with their 1967 debut and struggled to maintain that status, Morrison's ever-increasing withdrawal and simultaneous indulgence in hedonistic excess threatened the band's stability. He destroyed some of the band's studio equipment in a drunken outburst of temper, and he designed his ever more erratic concert behavior, miming sex, barrages of profanity, and similar antics to provoke intense, frenzied audience reactions. This did not go unnoticed by law enforcement officials in the cities where they performed. He was chased by police in New Haven, Connecticut, who caught him backstage with a female fan, and after taking the stage and baiting the officers, he was arrested on obscenity charges, of which he was later acquitted. By the release of their second album, Strange Days, the Doors had become one of the most popular rock bands in the U.S. In 1968, the Doors released their third studio album, Waiting for the Sun. On September 6th and 7th of 1968, the Doors played in Europe for the first time with 4 performances at the Roadhouse in London with Jefferson Airplane, which was filmed by Granada Television for the television documentary The Doors Are Open, directed by John Shepard. Venues in Phoenix and Long Island subsequently banned the Doors after Morrison allegedly incited audience riots. The whole mess finally boiled over in March 1969 when Morrison exposed himself to an audience in Miami for displaying lewd behavior. After a 2-month trial, he was found guilty, depleting the band financially and mentally, and nearly causing their breakup. The Soft Parade, the Doors' 4th album, was released later that year. The Doors retreated to the studio where they sounded musically rejuvenated on the hard-rocky Morrison Hotel album from 1970 and LA Woman in 1971. Shortly after the recording sessions for the album began, producer Paul A. Rothchild, who had overseen all of their previous recordings, left the project, and engineer Bruce Botnick took over as producer. Supporting tours were marked by continued police harassment, and afterward, a depressed Morrison left the country with his wife, eventually settling in Paris to unwind and write poetry. He had his first collection of poems, The Lord and the Creatures, published in 1970. But unfortunately, without the support of his bandmates, Morrison spiraled out of control and was found dead in his bathtub on July 3, 1971, the victim of an apparent heart attack. He was only 27 years old. He was buried in Paris, an area shared by Balzac and Oscar Wilde. Live recordings, greatest hits collections, and recordings and books of Morrison's poetry have appeared frequently in the years since, and his legend has only grown with the passing of time. There was even a movie on him back in the 1990s starring Val Kilmer and directed by Oliver Stone. And that's what happened to Jim Morrison. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and give me some facts about Jim Morrison that I failed to mention in this video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.